Okay, hello everyone and welcome back to, this time, Starcraft 2, except I'm not playing as Protoss, I'm playing as Terran. I figured I might as well learn the other races as, I'm sort of considering just switching to random once I've got a good handle on some sort of basic, sort of very stable, macro-enabling build orders for each of the races. Initially, actually, a few months ago, actually more than a few months, but I started playing Starcraft 2 multiplayer as a Zerg player, and most recently, as you may have noticed if you have been watching the latest videos on my channel, I have been playing as a Protoss, but this is the first time that I've properly spent some time learning the Terran race, who are probably the most easily understandable. They're humans, mostly in power armor, mixed in with some cool robots, and kind of siege weapons, and all that good stuff. So yeah, this is more or less... Actually, this is categorically my first game in Starcraft 2's 1v1 ranked multiplayer, playing as Terran. So yeah, you've got that to look forward to in this match. This is one of my placement matches because naturally Starcraft 2 does have separate ranked ladder scores for each of your racial playthroughs. So the level of play from my opponent might not be the best, but at the same time, the level of play from me definitely won't be the best. So it all balances out in the end. So what I'm doing, this is, from what I can gather, more or less completely standard for all builds in Terran. You go for a supply depot as you would expect. You need to max out your supply, then you go for a barracks. And I'm actually choosing to go for the making a reactor at the same time as making my barracks, and then as soon as I can, making a Reaper, which is more or less timed to be coming out as soon as the barracks finish, if you've mined enough gas. From this point, you can go into either an expansion or straight into a factory, then starport, you know, or multiple barracks. Yeah, so this initial sort of supply depot, barracks, then into whatever you want, that initial portion is completely standard across all Terran games, or at the very least it seems to be. So meanwhile, I've got this fairly cool Reaper just heading across the map. He will be mostly there for scouting purposes, although if you do get any damage, from what I understand, that is definitely a bonus. Meanwhile, I've got my second command center currently halfway under construction, and I'm getting a factory as well. So what you do with all this gas is you sort of go through the tech tree and just enable everything that you want to get. And hilariously, my opponent somewhat overreacted with his probes. He lost a fair amount of mining time, but sadly my micro was more or less completely not there, completely absent, and as a result I lose my Reaper to this very well placed cannon, very sneaky indeed. From what I gather, this is a very Wings of Liberty-esque build with a forge at the front and cannon and pylon and etc, etc. But regardless, my opponent's expanding much later than I am, and that is definitely good for me. So I'm adding on additional barracks. I've got the tech lab on the factory, which allows me to get siege tanks, and from here I can go into a starport, sorry, and then get medivacs, then start doing drops with all my bio. If you're going for mech Terran, I do believe that you would instead go for sort of a reactor instead on your factory at some point, and from there go with Hellions instead of Marines, and then a harass with the Hellions, and then go into siege tanks and Thors and etc, etc. So expanding down here, getting my natural expansion. This is very nice to Terran, super safe. The only way your opponent can get in, assuming you've walled off this area at the ramp, is over at these rocks, and these rocks will take a while for any opponent to break down. So I've got my first siege tank out. Eventually I will be indeed, as you might expect, sieging it up, which is pretty cool. I've got my barracks, I've got my tech lab on my second barracks, which allows me to get stim, it allows me to get combat shields, so that's all very necessary for any budding bio player. And in the meantime, I noticed that my opponent is sort of scouting with his adepts, so I siege up my tank near the front of the ramp. Lots of nice vision here. I'll be able to hit anything that attempts to kind of push up through the ramp. Even if you tried that, A, it would be very hard, and B, the siege tank plus Marines would be more than enough to take that pressure out. In the meantime, getting combat shields. From what I understand, getting combat shields before stim is necessary, as the way Stim does damage to your Marines, if you don't have combat shields before the Stim just like chunks away way too much damage. So that seems to be the correct order of things in terms of build order and sort of tech order and upgrade order, I guess. So in production, I am trying to max out this first expansion, and as you can see, my opponent is indeed trying to break down these rocks, and eventually, spoilers alert, he will succeed. Meanwhile, he's got his Twilight Council, not currently researching anything from the looks of things. If we look at upgrades, he's got +1 ground weapons for his Adepts, which makes sense. Personally, I think he should have gone for the Glaive Adept upgrade, as that would, with all these Adepts, naturally be quite good. But otherwise, fairly standard stuff. Got an expansion. Slower than it should be, but I don't think either of us are playing as optimally as we perhaps could have. Meanwhile, I've got this pretty cool drop heading out. Now, this is the aspect of Terran play that I absolutely adore. The fact that you can sort of enable the Marauders and Marines in your army to do critical damage through the addition of these Medivacs, as you can just drop them in super sneaky locations, and from there, sort of just do probe kills, eliminate tech, force additional pylons or whatever buildings you want to be rebuilt. It's super powerful if your micro is enough on point. I'm getting +1 ground weapons as well. I've already got combat shields, and I'm just getting Stim now. I'm hopefully going to be continually building stuff. I'm getting another tank out, but meanwhile, my opponent finally takes out those walls, and yeah, he starts destroying a lot of SUVs. So I pull some Marines and Marauder, I reposition my sieged up tanks, so they can hopefully get some nice damage done, which they do in the end. I'm losing some Marines, but meanwhile, I'm wiping the probes off of his natural expansion, and eventually I will actually do very critical damage to this Nexus. And this means that he is essentially a 1-base Protoss, which is a position that no Protoss wants to be on. Meanwhile, eventually the Adepts do go down to these tanks, and I have to be fair, I have to rebuild all the SCVs as I do lose them all. But as you can see there, I do wipe out the Nexus, which is a big deal. That's 400 minerals that he has to respend. And because all of his Adepts are on the other side of the map, other than these ones he's currently warping in, he has sort of a very exposed main base. Which is kind of crazy considering that I've already taken out his sort of natural expansion, so all of his forces, more or less, are focused on this area of his kind of map control. And I'm forcing all of this lost mining time, so this is just fantastic for me. Even though I'm going to lose some Marines, I'm putting the pressure on. I'm completely distracting him from making any economic moves whatsoever. And meanwhile, if we look at the production tab, I'm getting upgrades, those are about to finish. I've still got a bunch of Marines available in this dropship, and I'm getting more SCVs. I'm remaxing out this base. I've got a fair amount of production. I've got another tank. I've got 3 tanks at home. Now they're better positioned to cover this base, which is nice. And hopefully I will start to make more stuff, as that does seem to be the overriding theme of Terran. Just kind of micro, whilst in the background, kind of just repeatedly cycling through all of your macro. Kind of going through your barracks, making a bunch of Marines, couple of Marauders, going through your factories, getting another siege tank, going through your starports, getting another couple of Medivacs, or even Liberators, even Vikings potentially, maybe against Zerg to get out there. Overlords. And yeah, whilst you do that constant cycle of production, you try and do damage across the map with drops. So this is what I was trying to emulate this game. And it seemed to work out quite well. Protoss, especially at this level, seems to be quite vulnerable to the whole drop kind of harass style of play, because it requires fairly decent micro to kind of counter drops, and also multitasking. You need to be switching between your main base, where the drops will be coming in, and your opponent's base, where you will be kind of attacking in and of yourself. So yeah, pretty good stuff. And as I mentioned earlier, it's super fun to do. You know, getting critical damage, the fact that I wiped out, you know, this expansion, I think twice, and also, actually, maybe just once, but I did damage to it the second time, and I also took out all those probes. So yeah, it's super fun. As you can see, my opponent is coming in on the left-hand side. He's gonna do the same thing that he did last time, as a result of taking out all those rocks right here, I believe, he feels that he has a nice spot to come in and do some damage with. But sadly enough for him, I am more than ready to kind of counter that damage with my own damage, and I've also got my third base down, and I will begin to just max it out, which is fantastic. My economy is bigger than his. I've got defenses up with these siege tanks, and now we will see very shortly that I will load up these medivacs and just move out. So my siege tanks, they force the adepts into a corner, and as soon as I see that the adepts are forced into a more defensive standpoint, and they're clearly not as much of a threat as they once were a few seconds ago, I do decide to take the move out. There we go. And this is a big ass drop. This is 5 medivacs worth of Marauders and Marines with upgrades. My upgrades aren't the best for the time of the game. Quite clearly they could be better. Only 1-1, that's not fantastic. But at the same time, this is a lot of stuff. And it's just going to drop into his main base. And all of his adepts, his fighting force, are here. Not that there were many of them to begin with. So I'm very happy. So with this number of kind of vulnerable medivacs loaded up with Marines and Marauders, I decided to unload them as quickly as I could into it so that they were safe on the ground essentially. And from here I can just do whatever I want. There's so little defenses available for him that I can just run amok and do whatever I want. And you can see this forces his adepts to return across the map, which is a-okay fine for me because it makes my third base completely safe. Which, if we take a quick look, yeah, it's starting to get maxed out, which is pretty cool. So I noticed that all of these all of these buildings were very vulnerable because this was, I think, the typical meme to include at this point. This was an Artosis pylon, and I get rid of it, and that completely deactivates all of these tech structures, you know, upgrades on Twilight Council, upgrades on Forge, and production. As you can see, he had a lot of queued up adepts. Those really should have been just more gateways for him to speed up that production. But regardless, his adepts come in, and even now they're not enough to take out this fairly well upgraded and sizable bioforce, especially with all of those medivacs. So yeah, my first experience with Terran on the ladder was hella fun, and I think drop play will be the type of play I will be employing in future. I think at this point I'm kind of planning on doing a rotation between the races and eventually transitioning, as I do believe I mentioned at the start of the video, transitioning into being a random player, as that way I will be able to practice all 3 races, understand the mechanics of all 3 races, and also understand the builds that I'll be seeing from my opponents better, as I will, you know, have a better understanding of what they'll be wanting to do, as I will be occasionally playing their very race. So yeah, should be quite cool. Very happy with this game. Drops are super fun. Bio seems quite powerful, and there's a lot I can be doing to improve with Terran. It seems to be very multitasking heavy. You've got to be constantly building stuff whilst also kind of dominating the map, which is definitely very fun. Bearing in mind what upgrades you're getting is, as you can see here, I was planning to get +2/+2. I probably should have had a second engineering bay down by the time the armory was finished for that +2/+2 timing. But yeah, there's a lot I can improve upon, but Terran seems to be pretty fun, so yeah. Definitely a fun match. So as always guys, thank you for watching, and more StarCraft 2 will be coming in the future. Yeah, hopefully I'll see you in the next video. Ta-ta!